I am very grateful to Peter and to Lucy in particular, who've been so helpful and supportive to me in the time since I've been campaigning. As Peter said, my name is Helen Gibson, I'm the founder of Surrogacy Concern, and I founded it immediately in the wake of the Law Commission publishing their proposals to liberalise surrogacy law in Britain. Plans which I, along with many other women and children's rights and family campaigners, religious groups and organisations such as yours, vehemently oppose. Before I speak about the details of the Law Commission's plans, I will talk more about surrogacy more broadly, both in the UK and abroad, and also about the associated and related issue of egg harvesting, which you may know not very much about, but you will do by the end of this talk, more than you probably wish to know. I'm going to assume that most of you know a little or a lot about surrogacy, but I will recap briefly for anyone who may be coming to this issue anew. Surrogacy is the practice of a woman becoming pregnant and her child being removed at birth to be handed to others who may or may not be genetically related to the child. These people are known as commissioning parents and may be in a couple or single. Single men have been able to obtain parental orders which confer legal parental status for surrogacy across the UK since 2019. We know that 95 men have done so to date. More usually, surrogacy happens in exchange for payment in countries such as the US, Mexico, Colombia, Ukraine, Georgia and Belarus, where in the case of developing countries, a woman's poverty and lack of choices is preyed upon, with surrogacy agencies brokering usually legally enforceable agreements. In some of these countries, the mother loses her rights to the child before birth, as in the case of California and in Mexico City. And it is usual in countries which allow commercial surrogacy for her to definitely lose her parental rights at birth, if not before, never to be listed on the birth certificate, and to have no ability or legal recourse to change her mind. Often the baby is taken from her straight at the point of delivery to the commissioning parents, who may be in the delivery suite or in another room. The mother may not even see the child again, and often the commissioning parents, certainly in the case of Ukraine, do not ever meet the mother. In the UK, Canada and Australia, so-called altruistic surrogacy is permitted, with tens of thousands of pounds usually exchanged in expenses, and women on occasion using their own eggs in the pregnancy. In the UK, the mother remains on the birth certificate until the granting of a parental order, which cannot be applied for by commissioning parents earlier than 6 weeks after the birth, but must be applied for within 6 months. We know of surrogate mothers in the UK who regret entering into surrogacy arrangements, and of examples across the world and here of women being pressured into it by family members and others. You might ask why women choose to agree to do this, and what we see time and time again is the surrogacy industry effectively grooming women out of understanding they are the mother of their own child. They're told that in the case of gestational surrogacy that they're not the mother, that they are just the oven, or the microwave, or a gestational carrier, which is of course to fundamentally misunderstand and deliberately obscure the bonding nature of pregnancy and childbirth, and the truth about how women's bodies make babies, and the reciprocal nature of the exchange of cells between a mother and a child. We see women being told they're doing something kind, miraculous and beautiful, perfect for what Anna described as the new constitutional age, even that they are privileged to have fertility. We have seen women trafficked for surrogacy into the UK and offered up for surrogacy by their own husbands or pressured within families to undertake surrogacy for siblings. Many surrogate mothers simply do not understand that they are the mother of their own child. Ignorance the surrogacy industry encourages and exploits. In countries which allow commercial surrogacy, the law effectively views surrogate mothers as vessels with no legal rights and no say over their own bodies once surrogacy contracts are signed. In 2023, 513 parental orders were granted in cases of surrogacy in England and Wales. That was in 1 year, for England and Wales only. While surrogacy is reserved to Westminster, the Ministry of Justice do not hold data on parental orders for surrogacy in Scotland or Northern Ireland, data which I have had to separately request from the Scottish Government and the Northern Ireland Executive. The Northern Ireland Executive have recently informed me they do not centrally record the numbers of parental orders for surrogacy there. Nor do the Westminster Government break down the data they hold, so we cannot see the split between domestic surrogacy and those bringing a child into the UK, conceived and born abroad, to a mother in a commercial surrogacy arrangement. We estimate this to be around a 50-50 split. Globally, the surrogacy market is now worth an estimated $14 billion. This is projected to rise to $130 billion by 2033. Tens of thousands of children have been born to surrogate mothers since the large-scale development of the practice in the 1980s. Surrogacy now represents a global industry of baby buying, with the trade in babies, human embryos, eggs and sperm worth billions and with millions of eggs in circulation. Surrogacy remains illegal in many countries in the world, but a growing minority of countries permit the practice. A bill is currently progressing in Uganda, which would regulate the practice and in principle allow for international commercial surrogacy in that country. In the UK, some cases here have gained notoriety in recent months, not least the case reported just a couple of months ago when a 72-year-old man was granted a parental order at a sheriff court on the east coast of Scotland for a 3-year-old boy born to a surrogate mother in the US in 2020. The boy's commissioning mother was already dead from a stroke. The couple was 69 when the baby was born. In the Mail on Sunday, just last week, we were quoted responding to the news that 95 single men have applied for parental orders for surrogacy in the UK since 2019, and that 293 men over the age of 50 have applied for parental orders, with 43 of those men being over the age of 60. Surrogacy is growing rapidly and demand is increasing. Where we see one jurisdiction closing, another often opens. Ukraine is still operating despite the war, though numbers are down, so couples are now looking to Mexico and Colombia. Thailand has announced it intends to reopen its borders for international commercial surrogacy, and Taiwan looks set to do the same. A disaster for women in Southeast Asia who will be pressured and trafficked for surrogacy, and for the children who will be taken thousands of miles away from their mothers after birth. Meanwhile, a British surrogacy agency, My Surrogacy Journey, has opened an arm for commercial surrogacy in Mexico, where they're offering around £12,200 to Mexican women to become surrogate mothers. And despite commercial surrogacy being notionally banned in the UK, commercial surrogacy agencies are free to come and go, visiting this country and hosting events, rather like this one today, where they can promote the practice. We even know of commercial surrogacy agencies who have permanent offices in London. One of them is just in Fitzrovia, not half a mile away from here. International commercial surrogacy is the Wild West. We have seen multiple cases of sex offenders buying babies, babies being abandoned or rejected when they are born disabled, surrogate mothers left with regret and birth injuries, and we know of surrogate mothers who have died in childbirth. There is no international treaty against surrogacy, and while human trafficking is overseen by the Palermo Protocol at the UN, surrogacy was not included within it during its development in the year 2000, leading a lack of ability to prosecute surrogacy across international borders or categorise it as child trafficking. Meanwhile, in the UK, while commercial surrogacy is banned, altruistic surrogacy is not. So-called expenses for surrogate mothers stand at an average of £15,000 per pregnancy. We frequently see women using their own egg in the pregnancy, meaning at the point of handover, women are giving away their own genetic child. In 2018, 5 cases of expenses over £60,000 per pregnancy were presented to the family court in England and Wales. And as I've said, we know of many cases of coercion and regret and pressure right here in the UK model, including cases of surrogate mothers fighting through the courts to get access to their own children later. In fact, there was a case of this reported in the Mail, the Times and the Telegraph just 2 weeks ago. Despite commercial surrogacy not being permitted in the UK, there is nothing to stop any British person going abroad, buying a baby and bringing them here. If one parent is genetically related to the child, they almost always are granted a parental order, thus circumventing Britain's ban on commercial surrogacy practices. The UK government does not hold the data on the numbers of children brought into this country this way, or for domestic surrogacy where a woman uses her own egg. We view this as a failure of safeguarding and a child protection issue, which we have raised with all the relevant government departments in Westminster. Provided there is one commissioning parent who is related to the child, usually the father, a parental order is almost always granted by the courts. A new birth certificate will then be issued with the commissioning parents listed as Parent 1 and Parent 2. In all honesty, we have no idea how many cases of surrogacy exist in the UK because the data is not complete, and it is widely understood that many parties never actually apply for a parental order. The NHS does not proactively track surrogate births, but the numbers are growing quickly and have more than trebled in the last decade as the practice becomes increasingly normalised and encouraged, both by celebrities and on social media, as I've said, hovering around 450 to 520 cases per year. So who is doing this and why are they doing it? In the early 1990s, the numbers were small. Couples who could not have their own genetic children for reasons of infertility, usually caused by situations such as women having undergone chemotherapy or other treatments which damaged her womb or eggs. Today, we see a far greater mix between heterosexual couples, single men, gay male couples, and those pursuing surrogacy, not because they are medically incapable of pregnancy, but for social reasons. For example, being able to get pregnant but not wanting to endure pregnancy or interrupt work, as is the case with celebrities such as Paris Hilton or Priyanka Chopra. Surrogacy is now way beyond the realms of small numbers of wealthier couples and celebrities. It is spreading into every community and every town. A practice which once elicited outrage across the country, as those of you who remember the case of baby Cotton in 1984, who was sold by her mother for £6,500 will recall, is quickly becoming normalised. What was once understood to be exploitation of a woman's body is now seen by some as a service they are entitled to, and in extremis, a medical requirement the state should pay for. Background checks and the safeguarding process for surrogacy is in no way comparable to that which we see in adoption. And unlike when you buy or adopt a new puppy or kitten and have to wait 8 weeks before you can remove the animal from their mother, no such law exists in the UK to protect a child or their right to remain with their birth mother. Don't be too effusive in how you respond because I'll start crying and I've got about 20 minutes left to go, so we need to soldier on. All of which brings me on to the proposals by the Law Commission of England and Wales and the Scottish Law Commission, announced in March 2023, which would establish a new pathway for surrogacy in Britain, removing the need for oversight by the family or sheriff court and dispensing with parental orders completely for teams on the new pathway. Commissioning parents would be listed on the birth certificate at birth, and the mother would lose her legal rights at birth, provided she had not withdrawn consent, which would be given much earlier in the process and not proactively sought again at or after the birth. After birth, the surrogate mother would have just 6 weeks to withdraw her consent, but even then would not automatically be granted custody of her child, but would have to battle it out in court, even when she'd used her own egg in the pregnancy, and this would still be permitted. Open advertising for surrogate mothers would be allowed for the first time, coming soon to a tube station or a bus near you, so keep your eyes peeled. Regulated surrogacy organisations, likely the current agencies, would be set up, having power to approve teams on the new pathway, a direct conflict of interest. A minimum age of just 21 was recommended for surrogate mothers and just 18 for commissioning parents. The Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, or HFEA, would be tasked with overseeing these regulated surrogacy organisations, and they stated that they did not have expertise in this area and they've shown no enthusiasm for this role. Meanwhile, expenses would not be capped, and the process for applying to bring a baby born through commercial surrogacy abroad would actually be made easier, despite the Commission's acknowledging that surrogacy abroad is largely exploitative and fraught with risk. Mercifully, in one of their few more sensible moves, the last government stated they would not be taking the Law Commission's plans forward. We now have a new government, and we are waiting on the new government in Westminster releasing their long-form response to the Law Commissions, and we have made clear to them our concerns regarding the proposals. Letters which we sent were co-signed with many signatories, including Family Education Trust. You might wonder how and why the law commissions ended up recommending change which so obviously strikes so many of us as dangerous and misguided. Quite simply, the same institutional capture we have seen running through our public institutions in the last decade has been witnessed here. Just as Stonewall and others lobbied hard behind the scenes for changes many of us found unacceptable and harmful, the same has been done by surrogacy agencies, in tandem with lawyers who stand to make a significant profit from new proposals on surrogacy law reform. Pushed for hard by the surrogacy industry, agencies and lawyers for many years, as more people pursue surrogacy, we face a range of challenges. Largely concentrated at the upper end of the income scale, we will see more promotion of the practice and greater suppression of dissent as more journalists, politicians, and those in high status influential jobs pursue surrogacy. A case in point, a few months ago, Radio 4's Desert Island Discs programme interviewed 2 women in a row who'd both had children with surrogate mothers. And when one discussed chucking embryos into the surrogate mother, no pushback was made by the interviewer. We will also start to see a decline in the number of politicians and journalists who understand the hardships and rigours of pregnancy, labour, and the importance of the 4th trimester, or who understand the relationship of the dyad and the crucial period of maternal bonding in pregnancy and afterwards. Other politicians will start to speak out less because it is embarrassing, because their colleagues are having children with surrogate mothers. We currently have members of the UK government who have children with surrogate mothers, as well as prominent journalists at the BBC, ITV News, and the Times newspaper, amongst others. The head of the investigations team at the Times has a child with a surrogate mother. So if you wonder why you keep seeing the Times pushing these surrogacy and egg harvesting stories, well, there's your answer. So it's vital we grow our numbers and raise awareness of the issues and the impact they have on women and children, because we are at a profound disadvantage. And the general public know very little about how this works. But if it becomes an expectation that going to a surrogate mother is something you can or should be able to do, or that access to eggs is something you should be entitled to, it becomes a far bigger challenge. Which brings me on to the other related area we campaign on, egg harvesting. Gestational surrogacy relies hugely on donor eggs. If a commissioning female would-be parent doesn't have her own eggs, she or a male couple or a single commissioning man will buy donor eggs. These are often chosen from an egg bank or an online catalogue provided by the fertility clinic, but you can obtain them from a jurisdiction of your choice, and most clinics will ship them for you frozen for a few £1,000s. Fresh eggs are generally more expensive. And if it sounds like I'm talking about things we buy in a supermarket, that's because it is. Buyers choose the characteristics they want the child to feature: race, nationality, hair colour, eye colour, educational attainment rate, height, etc. And they will use the eggs to create embryos for implantation into the surrogate mother. So we see this splitting of the mother, egg donor, surrogate mother, maybe a third commissioning female parent. And of course, it's then far easier for buyers to make the argument that the surrogate mother is not the mother. She's, in their eyes, just the gestational carrier, or, as one child of a surrogate mother was coached into putting it by her father, an easy bake oven. Or even that the child doesn't have a mother at all, which is of course untrue, but which we see in the general discourse all the time. Now, eggs degrade in quality as a woman ages. Egg harvesting is a young woman's game. I don't know if there are young women here in your 20s, but you are absolutely peak target for egg harvesting. A woman is born with all the eggs she will ever have, millions at birth, and by her early 20s still has hundreds of thousands. Egg harvesting has become big business. In the US, young women are targeted heavily, particularly at university, and could be paid maybe $2,000 to $10,000 per cycle, more for high-status donors at the Ivy League universities, sometimes less. Many young women who are not well off or who have college tuition to pay find hard to refuse. In the US, this practice is now completely normalised and largely unquestioned, and women like me who say, maybe this is bad for your health, might regret it later, it's very exploitative, isn't it, are laughed out the room. The eggs are then sold on for far more money by the fertility clinic. This can be with the woman as a known donor or anonymously. The process is grueling and arduous for the woman, often painful and even dangerous. In the UK, we've seen women as young as 18 donating their eggs. There is no requirement for the woman donating her eggs to have had her own children previously. Fertility clinics which target young women for their eggs are not legally obliged to list health risks on the adverts. Despite at least 2 women in England dying from complications arising from ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome in 2005-06, a syndrome caused by egg harvesting, and which younger women are at greater risk of because of their higher numbers of eggs. We have drawn these issues to the attention of central government. Fertility clinics in the UK are allowed to reimburse expenses, that word again, up to £750 per cycle, rising to £986 per cycle from the 1st of October this year. Women are allowed to undertake up to 10 donor cycles. If any of you have gone through IVF, you will know exactly how hard and arduous that would be and how dangerous for your body. Despite being able to claim nearly £1,000 per cycle, the Department for Health and the HFEA tell us this is altruistic and will not act as a financial incentive to women to donate their eggs from a point of financial need or hardship. We are very concerned that this incentivises young women living in poverty or students to give up their eggs for money, actions which we believe many will live to regret, particularly as they get older. We also think that the sum of £986 to women for their eggs is curious, standing as it does in contrast to male sperm donors who receive £35 for each sperm donation, rising to £45 per donation from October. The Department of Health has confirmed to us that they have undertaken no research into the long-term risks of egg harvesting, and that adverts placed by fertility clinics asking women for their eggs do not have to list health risks. We have asked the Department for Health and Social Care to ban egg donor adverts, or at a minimum say that they must mandate health risks be listed proactively on the adverts asking for women to donate their eggs, and that women under the age of 25 should be stopped from donating. These requests have all been denied to us in the last fortnight by the current government. This is all bad enough, but where this takes an even more sinister turn is when we find out that the Scottish Government, who equalised access to NHS IVF in 2016, has since 2021 been targeting women as young as 18 for their eggs, and young men their sperm, via publicly funded adverts on social media, the radio, and in public buildings. Yes, really. I wish I was making it up. I really wish I was making it all up. I'm not making any of it up. The adverts, again, do not list health risks. The adverts have run at a cost of over £186,500 to the Scottish taxpayer since the campaign started. At the last check, 65 women had come forward for egg donation following the adverts, which are being run because the government says there is a shortage of eggs and sperm. Rather than accepting this is perhaps reflective of the fact that most people don't want their genetic children to be raised by other people, the Scottish Government see this as a problem to solve and have effectively turned young women's bodies into public resources to be mined for the benefit of the wider public. Come on, Gibson, pull yourself together. The Scottish Government do not hold data on the sex of the people who are asking for eggs. So we don't know if 18-year-old girls are having their eggs harvested largely for the benefit of older men, though we are certainly very concerned at this possibility. And the Scottish Government confirmed to us just last month that, like the Department for Health and Social Care, they have not seen or commissioned research into the long-term health impact on women of donating their eggs. The adverts are designed to prey on a woman's altruism. Perfect for the Be Kind era, the adverts speak of love, joy, and hope. Lovely pastel colours, little sperm wiggling past in the YouTube adverts. Everyone's happy, everyone's a winner, except the boys and girls of Scotland. I should stress just what a major departure this is, and what a breach this is. We are not aware of any other government in the world targeting its own people in this way. We see it a lot with fertility clinics around the world, including in Spain, which is the European capital of egg harvesting, but not the state. It is supremely ironic that over a year ago, the Scottish Government apologised for their role in historic forced adoptions, but at the same time was pushing women and men as young as 18 to donate their gametes. We are in truly dystopian territory here. A government encouraging public entitlement to the gametes of 18-year-old girls is concerning in the extreme. We have written to the last 3 Cabinet Health Secretaries in the Scottish Government, the current First and Deputy First Minister, the former Scottish Tory leader, the current Scottish Labour leader, the UK Government, and every single MP in Scotland to inform them of the campaign, the dangers and our objections, to no avail. We are incredibly grateful to publications such as the Scottish Daily Mail, the Scotsman, the Herald and the Scottish Daily Express for the coverage they have given this issue. I am in danger of going over time here, but I must stress just what a physical danger and unnatural strain egg harvesting puts women's bodies through. It was designed to stimulate a small number of eggs for older women and women with a low egg reserve to use in their own IVF. It is incredibly dangerous to artificially encourage young women's ovaries to overproduce eggs in mass quantities, and we don't know enough about the long-term risks to women's health. This is puberty blockers all over again, and the debate on this issue is where we were on gender ideology and the associated problems 15, 20 years ago, and we need to catch up very quickly. Egg harvesting puts women through several stages, which will be familiar, as I've said, to any woman here who's undergone IVF. The woman must inject hormones, known as downregulation, which switches off the pituitary gland to stop the ovaries working temporarily and allows her cycle to be controlled by the clinic. In cases of fresh egg donation, her cycle is synced with the recipient woman's. The woman then takes follicle-stimulating hormones to overstimulate the ovaries into producing an artificially high number of eggs at the same time. The woman then injects human chorionic gonadotrophin, which helps eggs to mature, ready for retrieval. This maturation mimics the natural process which normally triggers ovulation, and this step is essential for egg retrieval from the ovary. The woman is sedated. Eggs are collected using a very long needle inside a speculum. If you're into crochet or knitting, that's the kind of length we're talking about. That's passed through the vaginal wall and then punctures into each ovary repeatedly, gathering fluid from each follicle. That's the fluid that contains the eggs. And this is where ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome can cause problems. The ovaries swell up to around 10 times their usual size prior to retrieval. An ovary is usually about this big. Think of something more like a lemon going towards a grapefruit. And when the fluid leaks out of the swollen ovaries and spreads around the other organs, it can be fatal. There's no way to stop this once it starts. I have testimonies from dozens of women who have experienced this and who almost died as a result. Complications experienced by women who have contacted me include suffering from bowel perforations, sepsis, passing out from the pain of the procedure, and being held down by nurses to hold the ovaries in the right position during collection. We are quite clear, egg harvesting is gynecological violence against women. Asking young women to go through this for others is staggeringly irresponsible and inappropriate. It is not equivalent to sperm donation. I very firmly believe this will prove to be a future public scandal, with women presenting in a few decades' time with consequent health problems and or regret about giving up their gametes. It is galling to be living through this in real time and knowing that most of our political leaders do not see the issue. Egg harvesting takes an appalling and dangerous toll on young women's bodies. And again, we've written to the HFEA and central government pointing all of this out and highlighting the risks, in particular to working class women. It's quite something to be faced with the reality that either a faceless Whitehall bureaucrat or a junior minister simply sees this either as not a problem or simply a price worth paying so older people can get their eggs. And I should say that's an attitude we've seen replicated in Parliament. There was a Westminster Hall debate in the October before the last general election where 2 MPs talked about how important surrogacy was for couples, and another MP talked about a struggle her constituents had to get appropriate eggs, needing to go to Nigeria so they could get their eggs. to put this in context for you, international adoption from Nigeria into the UK is banned because it's seen as so dangerous and fraught with risk. But there's no problem on apparently importing eggs. And while notable world leaders such as the Pope and President Macron have respectively called for a ban on surrogacy and decried it for the way it affronts the dignity of women, few politicians are aware of the practice or see why it is so harmful. I've talked for a long time about surrogacy and how egg harvesting works and the scale of the problem. I haven't had much time to reflect on how these practices affect all women everywhere, or give much voice to the women affected, and certainly not the children who pay the ultimate price. A price which I know supporters and members of an organisation such as the Family Education Trust will only too readily understand and appreciate, knowing, as you do, the importance of mothers in the lives of their children, and just what a risk to society an explosion in demand for surrogacy means. But I'd like to leave you with a couple of quotes, one from a surrogate mother who I've renamed Rachel to protect her identity, and one from Olivia, a woman born to a surrogate mother who's happy having her name shared publicly. Rachel's case happened in the UK. I was an altruistic surrogate for some friends, carrying and giving birth to twins. It was an incredibly traumatic experience, and afterwards I had to receive treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. I never talked to anyone about my experience, as I still find it utterly devastating. After the birth, I was more or less completely abandoned by the intended parents. We only ever hear about the positive stories in the media pushed by the organisations that support and promote surrogacy. It is important that people hear about how surrogacy can go seriously wrong and the lifelong impacts of that on the women who offer their bodies to be used by others. Most hurtfully, I was not invited to the twins' christening. I was used for my uterus and then discarded when I was no longer needed. It was the most degrading and horrific experience. My mental health collapsed. I never talk about what happened to anyone, not even to close relatives, as I do not want to relive what happened to me. It wasn't until the Law Commissioner's consultation that I ever spoke about this. I am left with birth injuries, incontinence, and with separation of the abdominal muscles. I am now completely against all surrogacy, both commercial, which is completely immoral in my view, and altruistic unpaid surrogacy. The potential for abuse is too great. Women should not be encouraged to endanger their emotional, physical health and safety. Women matter. And I should tell you that Rachel originally gave her testimony in person to the Law Commissioner, Nick Hopkins, who oversaw this for the Law Commission, in a meeting. Later, after the consultation questions had gone out and they realised they hadn't actually consulted with many women's groups about how this might impact women. And she sat there in floods of tears and told him what I've told you, and he looked at her and seemed to get it, but then sucked his teeth and said, yes, but I do think we need to do something for infertile couples. So it shows how much we matter to them. Olivia said, mere seconds after I was born, I had been rapidly removed from the woman who had become pregnant with me using her own eggs and had carried me for 9 months. Rather than being placed in my biological mother's arms to be nurtured and adored, I was handed over to a man and woman who had simply paid an awful lot of money for me. The reality is a woman's body is being rented and a baby is still going to be separated from its birth mother. In my view, it makes no difference if the surrogate mother is not the biological mother. It's her womb that has nurtured the child. It's her voice the baby has heard day in, day out as it grows within her. It's her scent that will soothe the child. It is her they feel bonded to. I'm unable to stay silent while I still struggle with the traumatic legacy of surrogacy. Thank you.